Hey, I got some exciting news for you. Are you ready? Did you know that Paul wrote to the church and said that all believers carry the priesthood? Right? Because we're not Catholic, I can't call you a priest, but I can call you a pastor, right? That's technically what Paul's saying, that all of us have been given the right to be pastors. I should say just the right, the responsibilities. And then I was reminded that the month of October, you know what the month of October is in significance in the church? Pastor Appreciation Month. So I want you to stand and say thank you to all the pastors that are sitting with you, okay? So stand up and say thank you for being a great pastor in the house of the Lord. Well, we organize. How do you know? What do you know? Today we're going to be in the Gospel of John. This seems really hot to me. Am I too loud? Am I too loud? I'm really excited today to share with you. I want to talk to you about the Gospel of John just for a minute. You know, when you look at all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're all very significant. They're all very unique. But John's Gospel is, to me, is the most intriguing of the four. Now, why is that? Well, because I think, if I understand my church history correctly, John was the last living apostle, right, of Jesus, outside of Paul. But what's unique about the Gospel of John is that he is the first one of the three to try to get us to integrate the theological understanding of who Jesus Christ was. In other words, the humanity and the divinity of Jesus in with the concept of contextualizing his ministry, right? So he's bringing this together in a very unique way. And because of that, his book's not chronological. In other words, it doesn't flow from the very beginning of when Jesus began his ministry to the crucifixion. He's kind of giving you snapshots of what he remembers, because when he writes this, John is at the end of his life, okay? He's in I think he's around the city of Ephesus somewhere, and some of the people came to him and said, hey, John, you know, I know you've been waiting for Jesus to return. I know he told you when you were way back in Jerusalem that, hey, I'm going to come back. And I think John really thought he'd be back in his lifetime. And so all these important stories that he had remembered about Jesus, he was just sharing them by what's that thing that comes out of your mouth? Words, right? Sharing it by word. And someone came along and said, you know, John, you're getting a little old, right? Probably getting a little senile. So why don't you write these things down for us? Because we want to capture the essence of what Jesus did. And so John scribes his gospel and gives it to us. And it's very, very powerful. It really is. The mixture of the theology with the practicology, can I say that word? Practicology of his gospel is just, to me, very, very powerful. So today we're going to be in the first chapter, okay? And we're going to do an experiment at some point. I'm not really sure when, but we're going to do an experiment if it goes well, okay? So we're going to be in the Gospel of John. Oh, let me just share this with you, okay? Because I see some new faces. The last couple of sermons that we've done here, and I understand Philip, is it Philip that preaches too? Hopefully he is a college student minister, so he's probably teaching you guys some crazy stuff that college students would understand, and we have no concept of what he's talking about. So, but over the last few weeks that I've been preaching here, we've been talking about the idea of Christian. What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to really live a life of this word Christian? And in our world today, we've determined that Christian can mean a variety of things. I work in the military. I'm a chaplain out there at Gowan Field, and I have discovered in my ministry that when you say the word Christian to somebody, it can mean anything. And because of that, people fall all over the spectrum on all kinds of different social issues. That you would think that if you were a Christian, we'd all fall in the same area of our social issues because we have the same values and principles that Jesus did. But because of that, we don't, all right? So Christian can mean anything. I've met young men and young women in the military who said, yeah, I'm Christian. I ask them what that means. They give me this concept that's like, wow, I've never even heard of that before. But has not, and at least from my experience, has no real connection with the real gospel who Jesus is. In fact, if you look in the Bible, the word Christian, right? We decided that the word Christian was never used by Jesus or his disciples, right? Jesus called the disciples, never used Christian. In fact, the word Christian became an outside term that the world used to describe the followers of Jesus. Paul said in the the book of Acts, that this thing was called the way. This movement was called the way. Because Jesus was the way, the truth, and the life. So they called it the way. You really were part of the way, right? So we have decided to no longer be called Christian. We want to be called disciples. Because the word is kind of scary, isn't it? It brings along a sense of accountability. Now, if you're a Generation X or whatever they call the new generation, they don't like Christian. They like Christ follower, right? So I don't really care what term you use. The concept is simply this. To be Christian means you're a disciple of Christ. That means you're in a right relationship with him and you're trying to live as he would want you to live, right? But that's difficult. It's very, very difficult to live like Jesus did because he was God and man together. He was perfect, right? I tell my wife all the time I'm pretty close to perfect. And she reminds me I'm not. Says, no, you're not, honey. Okay. You're far from that. Not really sure what that means, but yeah, pretty simple. Now I'm completely lost. So anyways, we're going to be in the Bible, okay? Does that sound good? In John chapter 13, verse 35, it says, by this all men will know that you are my disciple, if you love one another. So we need to understand that if we're going to be disciples of Jesus Christ, that comes with the responsibility that we have to love each other, love the world in such a way that it's real clear to them we're a disciple of Jesus Christ. That word love is confusing. In fact, that word is very difficult. So I think if you broke it down a different way, this is what, if Jesus was here today, I think this is the way Jesus would pose this statement to us. He would say something like this, that I want you to love others the way I loved others. I want you to love others the way I loved others. Now, I don't know about you, but when I look at the ministry of Jesus Christ and I try to look at the way he loved people, I struggle because his concept of loving is messy, right? In fact, I got a bunch of words here that we are going to use to describe it. It's messy. The way he loved was really messy. What I mean by that is he would roll his sleeves up and he would get into the stuff with them. Sometimes his love seemed inconsistent. And one minute he's pointing sin out, and in the next minute he's just ignoring it, sometimes it seems like. At one minute he's calling the Pharisees out, and he even calls them names, right? Vipers and brood of vipers, and you know, it's like saying someone's a vandal almost, right? That's what they would say. Say, I'm sorry, I slipped. But he would call them these derogatory names, when then at other times he would call people his child, his beloved. So it just seems to be very hard to nail. It's kind of like trying to nail Jell-O on the wall. How does Jesus really love? Sometimes it seems unfair. Sometimes it seems confusing and inconsistent. It's not easy to understand how Jesus loved. But this is pretty easy to understand, that while we were still sinners, he chose to die for us. That your sin and my sin was nailed on the cross because Jesus reached out and says, I love you. I love you so much that I'm going to give my life for you. I'm going to wash you with my blood. So we have salvation, not through works, but through grace, right? And the truth of the matter is that your sin and my sin is what put him on that cross. And we're in a world today where these two words just don't seem to want to collide. That it's hard to look at truth and grace in the same concept, the same time, the same continuum, right? Now, as a pastor, I love to be all about truth because I get to condemn people, right? I can just call out their sin and throw down on them, and woo, it's just fun, right? It's really fun. But when I'm not the pastor and I'm the whatever you people are here, right? The church members, I want the pastor to be all about grace. Right? I want him to be forgiving and teach me all about how Jesus is going to just take me in no matter what I do. And so we often in our own lives, we jump back and forth because, hey, sometimes it's more comfortable to be about truth because the world's an ugly place and we got to call sin out. And sometimes it's important to have grace because when I'm struggling, I need some grace. And I tell you what, I'm thankful for people who in my life have shown me grace. Okay? So how do you balance these two? How do you really roll your sleeve up and understand these two concepts? Well, let's start in John chapter 1. Now, I'd like to start in the very first verse, but there's so much theological discussion to go on there. I would get so sidetracked that I would never get to the sermon point, and we'd be here way after kickoff, okay? So we're not going to go there. Seahawks start at 2, by the way, okay? I want to skip down to verse 14. Verse 14 in chapter 1 says this, that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's you and I. Okay? So stop for a minute. I said you and I. But I want you to put on the mind of John for a minute. When John is writing this, the us is simply John and the rest of the apostles. What he's saying to us is that we, the apostles, witnessed the beginning, right, of the incarnation of God. I mean, grab that concept from him. What he's saying to us is, I saw God come from heaven down to earth and live as man among us. I mean, I smelt him, I touched him, I felt him, I watched him, I sweat with him, I cried with him. I mean, he was there. If anybody has a good asthma check for what it means to love like Jesus, it would have been them. And then he says the we, and the we is not you and I we, it's the we is the we of he and we. He being the disciples. He says, we, the disciples, the we, wait, that doesn't sound right. The John and the disciples, they saw his glory. And what was his glory? I think the glory was the combination of truth and grace demonstrated to a world that was desperately broken and needing some hope. And he said, I saw this glory, the one and only who came from the Father. Full, he says, full, like these bottles right here, full of grace and truth. Not lacking, ever. Never was Jesus lacking grace or truth. Wow. Verse 15 says, that I testified concerning him. He cries out saying, this is the one whom I said. This is talking about the prophet John. This is he whom I said. He comes after me, has surpassed me because he was before me. 16 says, from the fullness of his grace, we have all received one blessing after another. Let me read that again. From the fullness of his grace, we have received blessing after blessing after blessing. The fullness of his grace. Then we get into verse 17. Oh, let me stop just for a minute before we get into 17. When he says the word, the Greek is logos, right? Which literally means the word. What was he saying? What was he trying to get us to understand? I think theologically we have to go all the way back to the beginning when God spoke. He spoke by what? Word. And all things became into existence. The Word is powerful. And the Word simply is this.